2 points to mention that. I was watching President Bush talking about his recent book, and he was explaining a lot of questions asked. And one of the questions was, I'm so sorry that we didn't find any weapons of mass destruction. He said it with such, like, I wish he had that. There was some weapons, so he could be justified.
Right. Would have had made in USA had they found them.
Yes. And then another quote I would like people to know and get acquainted is that about some politician, I think it was Kissinger, somebody said, long as the people, somebody came and said, people are protesting and they're upset, said, long as they pay their taxes, let them protest. So now we are doing the same thing. We are protesting, but we are doing nothing. So it's time we should do something to hurt them. Maybe stop taxing, stop paying our taxes.
Did everybody hear both of those points? So the first point. What was the first point?
Mr. Bush is sorry.
Bush said that he was sorry that they hadn't found the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, because then that would have made him look better if they had found them. And he also was interviewed on television once and was asked about that, and responded very casually, well, what difference does it make if he had them, then he would have been the threat that we said he was. And so this was someone who was not just an idiot. He very demonstrably knew that he was lying about these things. This is someone who told Tony Blair that they might paint airplanes with UN colors and fly them low and get them shot at, and that would be a way to start a war with Iraq, and walked out, this is January 31st, 03, walked out, did a press conference where he talked about war as a last resort and how they're doing everything to avoid war. These are liars. The second point was how if we're protesting, we're doing nothing. Absolutely pointless and useless. But if we are refusing to pay our taxes, then we're doing something. And I disagree, respectfully. I encourage you to withhold your taxes as long as you are communicating powerfully to huge numbers of people the message about why you're withholding your taxes. Because otherwise they're just going to not give you schools and Social Security, and they're going to keep...
Yeah, I was just joking about that.
Oh, you were joking?
And my point was some way to get the attention of our politicians that we elect.
Okay, so not paying taxes was an example.
Yeah, it was a little, because I've seen people hurt by doing that.
So, and Kissinger's quote, he says, as long as they pay their taxes, what do we care if they protest?
Yes.
It's one way of...
Well, the fact is that often they do care if we protest. If we make it less likely that they are going to be able to get their jobs back in 2 years or 4 years, and if we disrupt what they're doing, and if we prevent them getting enough recruits for that extra escalation that they want. There are very useful things that we do, and when you do things locally, educationally, in counter recruitment, in passing resolutions through city councils, which a lot of cities are doing now, to say to Congress, stop spending our money on those wars, here's what we want you to spend the money on. You are doing very useful things with measurable success. But when you're trying to move Congress to stop funding the killing, they often will not tell you how close you're getting until you get there. But as Bush's book demonstrates, you can be getting very, very close and still be telling each other everything is absolutely hopeless. And I think that can be self-defeating. I mean, obviously we need to try every new strategy we can come up with, and marching around on Saturdays is often not the only thing that we should be doing. There are many approaches that can be taken, but I think that the fact that the news stories on 2 days ago, in some minority of cases, had to include the fact that while Obama was announcing 4 more years of hell in Afghanistan, the American people were outside in the snow chaining themselves to his fence saying no to that. It was a good thing. It was a useful thing. And so I think every little bit helps, and if your little bit is not paying your taxes, good for you. Let's just go to people who haven't said anything yet, and then everybody gets a second turn. So in the very back, and then here in the dark red. Yeah.
So I'm a longtime admirer of yours, David, and I've corresponded with you. Lots of us are working outside of the Democratic Party. I know that you've been closely connected with Dennis Kucinich. I'm just wondering, when will you guys, who are progressives, who are in the Democratic Party, grapple with the point that the duopoly is keeping us here? When can we have a multi-party democracy?
Well, are you going to ask me when I'm going to stop beating my wife, too? My first book, which I don't know if you've read, addresses that problem. I have never been a member of the Democratic Party. I've never worked for the Democratic Party. I consider the Democratic Party the second worst institution in our country. I encourage you to talk honestly about it. I think that there's a problem with too much emphasis on a particular solution to all of what ails us, and one of those solutions is let's start a third party, because if we have money controlling everything, and ballot access restrictions, and media and debate restrictions controlling everything, if we don't have a decent communications system, starting a third party is only going to work if the third party gets as corrupt as one of the two existing parties, or even if it's a shade better, because of how our political structure is laid out in the Constitution. It's going to replace one of the other two, and we're going to have one of the two parties we've got now and a new one. You're not going to have three that keep going. Another solution.
That's why I said multi-party democracy. Multi-party democracy. It has to be at least three.
Well, it's not going to be at least three unless we amend the Constitution in a way that makes it be at least three, and that would not necessarily be a bad thing. It could potentially be a lot better than what we've got now. But if we were to get rid of the money, if we were to take back our airwaves, if we were to open up elections to all candidates and all voters and make them verifiably counted, and all of the reforms that everybody agrees on, then not only could a candidate from a third party run, but a candidate from no party at all could run too, and just represent their constituents instead of the head of some party. I mean, it would be possible. And so I think that rather than finding the new Democratic challenger to primary Obama, although I'm all for that, I wish there was 18 of them out there running, and rather than finding the third party to start, although I'm all for it, I encourage it, I think what we need most desperately is an outside force that's not a party, that's an alternative to Fox News, an alternative to the Tea Party, an alternative to the Chamber of Commerce, that pushes everybody in the right direction by including through the electoral strategy of saying, unless you meet these standards, we will not support you, we will seek to throw you out. I mean, all of the groups on the Democratic side of things pick the candidate first, and then try to figure out rationales for why they're supporting that guy. You have to lay out minimum standards for policy positions, and if they don't come to you, you don't support them. And if you put some people in primaries or in generals who don't succeed, the Tea Party put some people in as Senate candidates who cost the Republicans the Senate by one analysis because they were too crazy. They still succeeded in moving everybody, the Republicans and the Democrats and the president, 10 steps to the right. I think that we need that from the left, or wherever peace and justice are, more than we need anything else. But these constant accusations of, if you aren't devoted to nothing but destroying the Democratic Party, then you aren't really truly for peace and justice, I think miss the... Okay, well, I get that a lot. I get this "you're with us or you're against us" thing. You're for the third party or you're for the corrupt party. I would like to radically decrease the power of the parties. And a lot of that is through the money, but a lot of it is through the rules of how things are done in Washington,
Money is.
and through the ballot access rules and the gerrymandering that's going to be redone worse this year, and all of that. And those reforms are all in my first book. Okay, I'll try. Okay, we were going right here and then here.
I'd like to just come back to demonstrations and protests and so on. And it's the easy thing to do, and we have a tendency to devalue it because it's easy to get out on the street, and we tend to think that it's probably not effective. And I would just like to give counterexamples to that. First of all, there was Nixon's consideration of using nuclear weapons in Vietnam, which is a famous example here. I'd like to add an example from New Zealand. During the Vietnam War, there was a very, very active anti-Vietnam War movement. And we thought the Prime Minister was an idiot who was in favor of the war. It turns out now from documents coming out that he and the Minister of Defense voted against acceding to the American request for troops. We had no idea. And when Hubert Humphrey came to New Zealand to screw more troops out of New Zealand, Holyoake, the Prime Minister, went out of his way to play up the demonstrations, to provoke the demonstrators. And there are people who were in the car at the limousine with him telling Humphrey, see how much the people oppose the war, we can't give you more troops. They did in the end send another token contingent, but we had no idea that we had an ally in the government.
Right. They don't tell you until it's over and you've won. They don't tell you. Is it your understanding as well that the Maori people in New Zealand, had they stuck with violent resistance, would have been exterminated and saved themselves by turning to non-violent resistance?
That's a different, I don't know. I've not.
I thought you were from New Zealand.
I am,
Oh.
but I've not tried to analyze that
Okay,
particular
well,
question.
Well, that's my understanding from what I've read,
Well,
and
they
I
fought,
think
they fought two wars. They fought them quite brilliantly. I'm not sure whether they would have been better off if they hadn't or not. That's a very difficult question. There was a retreat to the King Country, and there was a peaceful resistance centered in the middle of the North Island. And that was quite successful for a long time. They prevented the railroad going through for quite a long time. You know, there's been quite a land revolution now in New Zealand, and a lot of restoration of land to the Maoris, so the peaceful phase of it has, in the end, been more productive, that's true.
yeah, it seems in the violent phase there were fewer of them still in existence every year. Okay, one, oh, we were going to go right here, and then two behind you, and then this gentleman over here.
Well, just going back to Lucas, I was wondering if you could briefly address the Ross Perot phenomenon.
Well, we may have a Bloomberg phenomenon. I mean, we have a system where if you're a billionaire, that's considered an admirable thing, not an offensive thing, and you can buy your way into an election. And then we have such a perverted understanding of democracy that we think that makes someone more independent, and being more independent is a better thing. Because of all the corrupting influences on our government, the money, the media, the lobbyists, we think of the public as yet another corrupting influence. And so when someone gets into lame duck session, or they're retiring and therefore they don't have to care about the next election, then we think, oh well, now they're going to do the decent thing that's in their heart of hearts. And you know, when candidates run for office from every party and every political position, they always say, I'll ignore the opinion polls, I'll stick with my principles. And we, oh, thank you for ignoring us. You know, we have this twisted notion of democracy. And so when a billionaire comes along who can ignore some of the corporate funders because he doesn't need that funding, but can also ignore us, can ignore, you know, we think, oh, someone independent, that's a great thing. And they've proven they can run the country because they can sell widgets and create a monopoly and rip off consumers. And we think that that's equivalent to being able to transfer majority opinion into law. And there's no relevance at all. I mean, I think what's most interesting about what Ross Perot did is that he was not, after the fact, demonized like Ralph Nader. Yeah. You know, when you play the spoiler role on the right, you know, or the center right, or the Texas wacko or whatever that was, you don't get demonized like Ralph Nader, who is one of the best Americans alive, has been demonized for having cost Al Gore an election that Al Gore won despite all of Al Gore's efforts to lose. So we had two questions back here. Yes, you and then you and this gentleman and then. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
So I see two problems maybe, anti-war and gang violence, and even violence against death penalty or against animals or whatever. First of all, I don't see many young people involved, engaged in anti-war protests or against this kind of violence that are everywhere in society that don't. And the other thing is church, the establishment, religion here, because they think they are not mainly against war, and they actually promote even in churches. As a foreigner, I noticed that a lot, and it just struck me that in church they would, pray for the army and not pray for the victims of wars, for example.
Yes.
This is just an example where I think it's kind of widespread.
Well, I think you're right, that there are a lot of weaknesses, and I think that there is an opportunity right in this moment when everyone's focused on the money, when the deficit has been turned into Manuel Noriega and Adolf Hitler, that we can build alliances with anybody who's active at all on any other issue at all, because every other issue wants money, and we want less money, and we can form partnerships where we say, take the money out of there and put it over there. There are more young people in environmental groups than peace groups, and that alliance is very much possible. A group called Power Shift is going to bring a conference and rally and civil resistance to DC next April 1st through 4th, I think, and they are open to working with peace groups in the way that I described, I think, the resistance overall is the same reason that the labor movement has not been against a war in decades. It's just a desire to appear good Americans and patriots on the war question, so that, well, in the labor movement there's other corruption in war-making jobs, but on the whole, churches and everybody else want to look like good flag-waving patriots on the war question, and if it's activist groups, they think they'll get further. The Sierra Club thinks they'll have more leverage on environmental issues if they keep quiet about the single most destructive force killing the environment, because it's such a taboo to be against wars, especially wars that everybody's turned against but have already begun. Because once they've begun, then the wars are about supporting the troops. The wars are for the benefit of the young men and women being destroyed by the wars. A fraction of a percent of the people being destroyed in the wars, and so it's very, very hard. But bringing more people in that way is exactly what we need to do, and figuring out what they want and where they're coming from and what tactics they want to use, and letting them lead part of the peace movement is what's needed. Yes, right here.
Well, we have to have publicly financed elections, otherwise we're not going to see much change.
We do, and at this point it's going to take either a dramatically different Congress or a remotely decent Supreme Court, or amending our Constitution. And it's probably going to take amending our Constitution circumventing Congress, meaning doing it just through the states, which has been there, available as a tool since the Constitution was written, but hasn't been done yet. And I think we're going to have to. And I recommend freespeechforpeople.org and movetoamend.org and Public Citizen and People for American Way and all the groups that are working on that. But and I think maybe movetoamend.org comes closest to my earlier definition of a good independent activist effort. But freespeechforpeople.org as well is pushing that agenda. Well, but we have to build support for that in cities, in counties, in states, and if we can get the state of California on board with taking away corporate personhood at the federal level. It's been done in some localities in California, including Arcata, where yesterday we got a disappointing ruling in that cities, Eureka and Arcata, cannot enforce laws against military recruiters who recruit minors. That would be that you can pass and you should pass a toothless resolution that says we're against this, but you cannot enforce laws against federal agents, which would violate the federal.
What federal court made that decision?
This is in the San Francisco Chronicle this morning. It's about Arcata and Eureka, and I don't know what the court was. I don't know what the court was, but I spoke with one of the lawyers this morning.
District court?
I honestly have no idea what court it was, but you can go to my website, warisacrime.org, and you'll see the link to the San Francisco Chronicle story, and it probably says. Okay, there's been lots of hands. I think you've been waiting for a long time.
I just want to mention that you're talking to a crowd in Santa Clara County, which is where corporate personhood was originated by a court clerk in 1885.
By mistake.
But what I think your analogy, first of all, I admire your perception and your recording of history as you have.
Thank you.
And your analysis. I think your analogy of California won't go to war against Oregon, or among our states there will not be a war, and in Europe there cannot be a war because of the union in Europe. Between those entities, among the entities that you take, you don't have one sapping the labor and wealth of another. In the world situation, we do have the so-called developed nations of the North sapping most of the rest of the world for its resources and labor. And getting past that, in order to look at that seriously, we have to see who are the entities in those nations, and they're not the governments. They're the government. The governments, I believe, as you do apparently, are used as tools of a class of people. Today I was on the phone with Larry Shoup, who wrote a very important book about the Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on Foreign Relations is no conspiracy to my view, but it gathers together a network of the elites of our institutions and corporations, so that it is a power, a very diverse power, that has a controlling effect. I think we have to look at that seriously as a target. And the countervailing force that you mentioned that would be independent of the parties, although it's not at all independent of the parties right now, I believe is the labor movement and the potential of the labor movement. And I differ with you as to the Ev Havel-CIO, the same year that it split with Change to Win, the other way around, Change to Win did the split, for the first time in its history since 1887 with the FL, passed a resolution to get rapidly out of Iraq. It was the first time it spoke out against a war that was ongoing. And it speaks out on many things that we would all agree with. And I think we can find a great deal of countervailing force within labor.
Well, I agree with almost all of that, which was very well said. When you get to the question of the AFL, a couple of caveats. I mean, when the wars were Republican wars, they were bad wars, right? Now that they're Democratic wars, they're good wars. This is the position of many labor union officials. And when the AFL opposed the war in Iraq, it didn't do anything, it didn't put any funding or any muscle or any organizing behind that. It was just a position passed by U.S. labor against the war, by a democratic organizing effort within the labor movement. And we are very, very far. I mean, just in the past week, We saw after the UAW backed a corporate trade agreement in Korea, a NAFTA for Korea, because they were going to get a handful of jobs out of it. And as you saw this dispute arise, it took better part of a week before the AFL-CIO could declare that it was opposed to corporate trade agreements. When you have gone silent on the Employee Free Choice Act,